All right, let's return to Aston and this fallout. Where to now for the Liberal Party? Joining me is Australian Financial Review political editor Phillip Coorey, who was in the era of sort of rubber bands and fireworks if you were bored at school rather than mobile phones. What's your take on Aston, first of all?
Oh, the same as everyone else, Tom. There's no good way to spin it for the Liberal Party. Although, I mean, quintessentially, it's a suburban electorate with a high rate of mortgages in the middle of a spate of interest rate rises. It's a Liberal seat. They campaigned on the cost of living and they still didn't win it, and had 100 years of history in their favour. So I mean, just put all that together and sort of underscores probably how seismic it was in terms of what's going on out there at the moment. Yeah. So
one excuse or reason being offered is the so-called drop-in candidate. So Roshena Campbell lived in Brunswick, which is a long way from Aston, and demographically. It's Mars and Venus. The problem is when you look at this electorate, what should have been the natural upside, the type of seat it is, the outer suburban, mortgage belt, rates going up, and it had already had a 7% swing.
Yeah.
So 6 on top of 7.
Swing on a swing, and
in a few months, it's disastrous.
And it's rare you get that. Look, at the senior levels of the Liberal Party, Tom, the fact that Ms Campbell, the candidate, wasn't from the seat was significant. One person likened it to Fowler, what happened in Fowler at the general election when Labor tried to plonk Christine Keneally in a far Western Sydney seat and got the backlash about that. And Labor pushed that very hard in their social media campaign out in Aston. The barrister from Brunswick, it resonated. The Chinese vote went against the Liberals again, so they still don't have, they've still got to make up ground with the Chinese voters they alienated before the last federal election. Mr Dutton's unpopularity still in Victoria, which no one is contesting. They were the sort of three probably main factors up front. And even though Alan Tudge, the outgoing member, had his own share of personal controversy, he was still quite popular out there. I noticed Jason Wood was saying it on your show to Laura Jays a bit earlier, but I've heard that from both sides, that he was their local member. He still, even though he had his troubles, he was still popular out there and he was their guy. So those, I wouldn't underestimate.
Last time he got the same swing as everyone else, basically, but
he's still got a 40%
if he goes, vote. He's popular, and that's the issue.
I mean, the primary vote in Aston, the last election, I think it was about 41, wasn't it?
43.
Yeah, in Victoria it was 29. So he did well. But they're not really happy with him now for going when he did. The timing of it was pretty bad.
I think another interesting thing when we talk about Peter Dutton is there's no one to take over right now, but you actually hear this privately and on air. I mean, Keith Wallahan just said this, the Peter Dutton I know, he's a great bloke, self-deprecating, wait till the voters get to know him. But will they in that sense? He does this at the moment on breakfast television once a week, but it's totally in contrast to everything else you see.
Look,
how does he bridge the supposed gap between the reality of his personality according to his colleagues and the perception of people out there?
Well, the vomit principle. I think he's got a problem because his standing start is he's seen as this hardliner from his days in Defence and Home Affairs, and he hasn't had that sort of softening period of going through another portfolio for a few years.
The Scott Morrison Social Services Treasury.
The lilac shirts in the childcare centre and that sort of stuff. But you look at I'd follow Anthony Albanese's lead. I mean, can you remember a day in the 3 years leading up to the election where he didn't tell us he grew up in a housing commission house with a single mum? I mean, what they call the vomit principle, just tell it till people vomit and keep telling it. If you go back to Peter Dutton's speech, I thought his best speech of his leadership was the budget reply speech, where he spoke about his time as a policeman and his regard for women and children, how he doesn't talk about domestic violence. He ran into houses where women were being abused, and pulled them out of those situations. They're the sorts of things he needs to start talking about a lot more and just talk about it all the time, because a lot of people don't know that about him. He's been his pre-political career, protecting the vulnerable in a sense, putting his own thing on the line, and they're the sorts of things he's going to really...
and not be afraid to say it so much that the media's sick of it.
Yeah, we'll get cynical about it, like we got cynical about Anthony Albanese growing up in a shoebox, but out there it worked, and it's now part of it's a solid part of the Prime Minister's identity.
Very briefly on The Voice, it sounds like a meeting on Wednesday with our political editor Andrew Clennell was talking about. Is it going to be difficult for Peter Dutton, particularly now, to try to bind the party on any of the three elements of it to a no? Has he lost that authority maybe? At the very least, they'll be able to campaign freely on it?
I don't think so, Tom, because even amongst sort of his critics, if you like, inside the party, some of the moderates who have disagreed with policy direction, they're not they're not that passionate about the voice. There's no great passion for the voice inside the coalition, even amongst the moderates. So look, as you say, bind his party. What does that actually mean? There's no vote in Parliament.
No. It's whether you can...
He can say, I don't want you out there campaigning for it. But that would only ever apply to the front benches anyway. And the Liberal Party, you know, they're free to go their own way. So it will be interesting if he does choose to say, we're going to be against it in all facets, whether a few people decide to go against that, given what's happened in Aston, and you know maybe a couple of people think we need to be seen as a little bit more progressive than we are.
Will be interesting, I guess. They might be able to test the water given Aston. Phil Coorey, thank you.
See you, mate.